the individual that says, I should be captain, and the individual that says, I want to be captain. Generally, the individual who says, I should be captain is that person that you're talking about. The person that just wants something on their resume. They, in a sense, feel that they're better than everyone else. And I think that's the dangerous person that I don't ever want as a captain of my team. The person I want as a captain of my team is the person that says, I want to be the captain of the team, and they have good reasons for that. And typically I've found those reasons are things like, I know I can help the other players on the ice, and I can help them off the ice. I really love and I care about this team. They make it about everything other than themselves. That's what a good captain does. An individual that makes it about themselves is not going to be a good captain. They're just going to have something to stick on their resume, and a parent can brag that, well, my son or my daughter, they're captain of the team.
Well, you use the term captain. I'd like to jump into the adult world, the business world, and a position of authority or leadership. And the disconnect in that, in the corporate world, the everyday working world, in terms of the same kind of problem we're talking about. The leadership is, from my understanding, billions of dollars are being spent on leadership development in the corporate world. And that, to me, is the idea of being of service, a servant to those around you, is sort of a prime example. And I'm just curious about that in your working life, your day-to-day working life, whether it's at a university or a company or people you know that are in leadership positions. How do you equate that with coaching and your experiences?
Well, it's interesting that you say that. When early on, when I was starting at the university, we had this speaker come in, and this was all everyone that was faculty, support staff. They were all in this large. We actually did it in the cafeteria because it was a large space, and they brought in an individual, and he spoke about this idea of tribe, right? Which you probably heard of that, right? It goes back to when there were tribes, and you had your leaders, and everyone had a position, but everything was done for the good of the tribe. And he went on and on about this, and then they took a break, and I went up to the president of the university and I said, I'm listening to this, and all I'm really hearing is this individual describing what a good team is in athletics, right? That's what you're talking about, what a good team is, right? You have your leader, you have your assistant coaches, you have your captains, your assistant captains. Yeah, everybody has a role on a team. They all know what that is. So he says, that's really interesting. So I sit back down, and everybody settled in there. And so this is a room about 300, 400 people, right? And I sit back down, and he says, I was just talking to Coach Whitney, and he made a good point about leadership and what we're talking about here today. Could you share that with everyone? No, hey, you know what? I'm going to ask you to say something, right? Just completely put me on the spot. But I was really so comfortable and felt good about talking about what I knew was correct. I put all that information out there. And at the end of the day, he and the other people agreed that, that's what we were talking about. And we're a school with 21 athletic teams. So we really had all the tools for leadership. However, they had a division that was online schooling as well. where apparently that was fairly dictatorial at some point, I guess, from what I hear. So the two didn't work. And over time, after these meetings and that, and this is something that's incredibly important when you're thinking about all this, is the one detriment to any leadership position or effectiveness is ego. I've never worked for anyone or respected anyone that had an ego that was bigger than the group. I noticed that no one would really follow that individual. They might listen to what they say, and kind of, do the head nod kind of thing. But when they left, they'd be like, boy, this individual is just so full of themselves that we can't get on board with them. We can't imagine them being someone who would have our back. And at the end of the day, someone who have your back is looking out for you. That's what a good leader is. I mean, you need to find ways to be effective within that. But the first step is getting people to follow you, because you're gonna have the best plans and best ideas in the world. But if you can't find a way for someone to follow your leadership and believe in your ability to lead, you're really not going to get anywhere. So that's, I think, in the corporate world, I think that's, to me, I've had that true life experience where I've seen that.
Well, I'm going back now to leadership and the debates that we're having in hockey and minor hockey, so to speak. The dilemma, and is the the coach is really ultimately responsible for that selection. And what happens is you select 2 or 3 people and name them. Now, in the long term over the season, it usually works out because your selection process has been based on sound reasoning, integrity, authenticity, and what's important. But what Hal brought up and other people have brought up about leadership is it hasn't worked out that well for a lot of teams during the season because the culture that existed before and with people coming in the short term to replace, create their leadership, it really has become a difficult thing to do. And one of the most disconcerting things that you have to deal with in time. And we're trying to be preventative here. And so Hal, in his day, and I believe it would be high school, he recognized the challenge. He says it's one thing to pick a captain, and I'm talking here under 15. He said, what do you do to educate them, train them? And Al at the time shared a book, and I think I've shared it already, but I'll share it again. And he began a leadership training, and it was open, and Hal's on now, and I'm really glad because we're talking about you, Hal. Peter's on, and we've been talking about leadership, the importance of the selecting the leaders who were authentic and value driven and served others and that kind of thing. And you brought up the point of we've got to educate them. Young kids, girls, boys, whatever age, they need leadership training. And so Hal and I have been exchanging emails with a new director of operations with girls hockey here in Calgary. Hal had named a book, and Hal, I'll get you to comment on that a bit later. But
Okay.
that particular book, Hal, this gentleman who's taken over Girls Hockey Calgary, he's worked at a private school for the past 8 years. And the book that you talked about, he has been using, and his captains, he's been using it in a different way. He didn't lead the sessions. The captains led the session. They were the ones that literally organically created meetings and discussions and groups. And he mentioned yesterday that book. He says he hasn't gotten it back from one of the captains that took it a few years ago. It was that good. So, Hal, I'm going to ask you now to sort of bring Peter into the picture here, because Peter earlier had talked about his upbringing and becoming a leader because of the model established by his family and his father of looking after the family. And it really made sense. And I'm suggesting that all three of us here have played leadership roles. And I think we have to credit our families to that. And I think in our cases, our fathers, but in today's generations, it's going to be mothers as well, because they're assuming leadership roles.
Well, the other thing that I'll throw in real quick is that I did too that was real effective is, and I could see where it could work potentially in the youth level too, is right, if you have a U13 team, we'll say, right, or a U15 team, on that 15 team, you'll have some 14-year-olds, right? But you'll have your 15-year-olds. So I would, and I did this again at the university, and it worked out really, really well, to try to include as many people, because the more people you include, because that's the other thing that's dangerous about, if you pick a captain and two assistants, everyone else feels like, well, these are the guys, they're the ones, so that's that. We had at that year we had our three captains, which there was two seniors and one junior. And then what I did was we had 5 remaining seniors, so I created what I call the leadership committee. And I said, this leadership group are for you to utilize captains. These guys, the three of you will be where you're going to be because you have a certain role. And these other 5 individuals are in the trenches every day, just like you are, and they could probably reach into other areas and get other insights and have a voice that can help you lead. So they would periodically meet with the leadership group, and then I would meet with all of them periodically, and then I would meet with the captains separately as well. And it worked out extremely well, and it really bonded the team, and it really brought everyone together.
Hal, I wonder if you could step in and your experience over your time and just speak to this idea of, it's not just the captain or captain and assistants, and how you've dealt with it and managed to do what I think every coach should do, is expanded it to be inclusive.
Yeah, good morning, guys. It's always, the captain selection or choosing them is sort of a minefield sometimes. But, like Peter has done, I did with the high school boys for a long time. We tried a lot of different ways to select captains, and then came to the conclusion that, I started doing the leadership training for the captains, and then I realized, well, every player could actually become a leader. And, corporations spend hundreds of millions of dollars trying to develop leaders. And now we're working with teenagers, and whether they're high school or now I'm going to do it with my 15 and under group this year. So what I sort of evolved to at the high school level was we would eventually pick 2 or 3 captains, or a couple of captains and a couple of alternate captains. And then I would ask them who we should include in the leadership group, like you do, Peter. And I let them pick. But if another player wanted to be in the group, I'd say, sure. I mean, because we want to have, at least be a part of the conversation about leadership in general, because that's what we're talking about for captains. And, probably what I'm doing and what Peter's doing and what your friend's doing with the Calgary girls is the most leadership training that those young people will ever get in their lives. And so I think it's really valuable. What I did with it when I didn't do it last year because that was peewees. They're a little young. Get them to sit still for more than about 3 minutes was pretty hard. But with this older group, it'll be better. And you're right. There'll be some 15-year-olds and some 14-year-olds in there. But every player can be a leader somehow or some way. And so I connected back to, what has traditionally been done is the best player is the captain. And the best player typically scores the most goals. Well, most teams only have 2 or 3 of those players. But what about all the rest of the kids on the team? And you have, when I was coaching high school, I had kids from about 5 different communities on the team. And they would kind of, create their own little tribes in the locker room. They wanted to sit next to their guys that they played youth hockey with. And there was sometimes some friction. And so we try to, deal with all those issues. But if you put somebody into a leadership position and don't give them guidance or training, it's kind of it doesn't work. I mean, I'm not talking about just hockey. I'm talking about it even in the business I'm in, the financial industry. People get promoted from sales into leadership, and they don't give them any training on how to be a leader, and it doesn't always go very well. In fact, it usually doesn't go very well. And so what I will do this year, I didn't have captains last year because the question came up. I said, well, the captain can't technically do anything during games. So captainship is about what goes on in the locker room, what goes on in practice primarily, and then what kind of leaders have you selected? How about the really good player and then the not so good player? I mean, on a skill basis, so let's just use some like your first line center versus your third line center or fourth line center. How do you connect those kids together? The other concept I've used, which I think is strength in the locker room, strength on the ice. So the tighter your group is in the locker room, the better they're going to play as a team. But with high school kids, you have to expand the locker room to include school. And it has to include their social life away from the rink, because they're tempted to do things that they maybe shouldn't do. And most with, parties and drinking and that kind of stuff. And how does, as a team, the example I would tell them, I say, suppose you guys are all, there's a big party going on Saturday night, we don't have a game Saturday night. I know you're all on your chat phones going, let's go to the party. Maybe the captains or somebody in the group say, why don't we go to a movie instead? Not put ourselves in a position where we could get suspended from playing or get penalized. Because in today's world, there's no secrets anymore. It will come out. If you were there, there was a boy at Grand Rapids High School who went ice fishing with some buddies, and they took some pictures and posted them, and they are all holding a can of beer. And eventually it made its way back to the athletic director. The kid was suspended for 2 years. And it happened in the season before. So not good. The rules are pretty, we hold these kids to behavior standards that most of society doesn't recognize, but that's the way it is. Those are the rules. So, and I think the captain thing is an ongoing relationship discussion. So I know, Peter, the way I do it is anybody that wants to be in the leadership group can be in the leadership group, but they all get a book and they have to do the homework. And they've got, we meet I would say, let's read the first 2 chapters, make your notes, and then we'll sit down and talk. And then they'll come in and go, and you'll talk about your notes that you made. What kind of a leader do you think you are? Why? Don't tell me, tell your teammates. Now, whether or not I actually appoint captains depends on the group that I have. I mentioned last week that when I started coaching in this program, and this topic came up 2 years ago, and it was Bantams, which is what, U15, I guess. I said, who normally gets picked captains on your teams? And they said, oh, the coach's son. Well, how do you like that? I go, no, I don't like that. So I said, well, my son's 30 years old, so he's too old to play on this team. So we'll have to do something a little bit different. So we really went down to, somebody brought this up last week, which was good. I asked every one of them to give me 3 names, text me 3 names. And if they wanted to put their own name in, they're fine. If they wanted to be a captain. And then I said, well, okay, so are we voting? And they go, well, no. We're telling you what we think, but we want you to decide. I went, oh, okay. So we kind of went that way. Last year, we didn't do it because they're peewees, and I just don't think that they're socialized enough. I don't think they're mature enough to actually do it. But it is interesting that if you watch them in the locker room, you can see who the leaders are and who the followers are. It's pretty easy. Well, at least the vocal leaders, the guys that are making the most noise, interacting the most with other players. And it was our best player who scored a lot, half our goals during the season, but was also a really great kid. And I'll be coaching him again this year. So I think every group of kids you coach, I think it's, how many captains, how do you select them, how do you develop them, how do you train them? I think how you develop them and train them should be fairly consistent, but how you pick captains per se, for me, it's different every year. And maybe that's just partly my frustration with having had some really poor captains in the past. And then what do you do about it? It's hard to undo that. So anyways, that's my thoughts on it for now.
I'd just like to mention the influence that coaches have, it's really how you coach influences them and who they become. And I think the importance of understanding why you coach and how you coach in terms of your purpose of coaching tends to provide a sense of direction for the team. And sports have become a business, and sports, as we talk about it, is a sport. But there's a point at which minor hockey is treated like a business, and outcomes have become more distracting. Winning has become more distracting, and losing sight of the process, which is the purpose of playing, doing the right things to be the best you can be, become lost. And I think what you're both saying is we're speaking to the choir here. And the coach is the one that leads, and he may have the best intentions and he may do everything the right way, but at some point he might even be steamrolled because the people in charge, whether they're volunteer leaders or corporate leaders, have a different agenda, a different purpose, and they don't really understand the way of being your best in terms of adhering to the values that of leadership and playing a sport and becoming a better leader through playing a sport. So I don't know if that makes sense here. I'm getting a little philosophical and roundabout in it, but I think each of you can talk about players you've coached. And Peter, you can reshare that story of you're taking the seniors at university out for supper.
I was just saying that at that level, I mean, I think we get to that level as, like you said, you try to teach and try to train kids and understand like what it means to be a leader. But I would always try to simplify it once I got to the university level with those guys, because they're supposed to be older and supposed to know something, right? And I would always liken it. I would always liken it to a good father, and I would mention to them. So in my definition of that was when I was growing up, my dad made sure that we had the shoes, the clothing, that we were warm, that we were fed, and we were taken care of. And when it came for mealtime, my dad was the last one always to eat, because he made sure we had our food on the table and we were all good to go. And I had to have a tradition where I'll be doing it one more time because I got 2 seniors left on my old team. But I take the seniors out at the end of every year when they're ready for graduation. And we went to lunch, and the captain this year, it was very noticeable. I was telling Wally, the meals came. His was one of the first or second meals, maybe third meal. He didn't touch his food until everyone else had their food. Then he began to eat. And to me, that honestly, in all the years I've coached, that was probably one of the most satisfying moments I've ever had. Just seeing the kid connected the dots. So that was really, really big. And it's interesting with the whole thing with the captaincies, right? Like when you get to the higher levels, and from your experience with all that you've done, as at the university level, I hear coaches saying, I don't know who my captains are going to be this year. I don't think I have anybody. My first thought is I pause for a second and then I say, to myself, who have you been recruiting? Like what are your parameters for recruiting? Because this should not be part of it, not who's going to be my captain, but the type of individual I get on my team. Because to me, that's a little horrifying that I've got 24-year-old men on my team, and I don't know if anybody on my team can actually be a leader. So I think you have to look within a bit for sure on that one, but you also have to start to realize that, well, maybe, and to your point, maybe when these guys come in as freshmen, we should be doing more about teaching actual what leadership is, so that maybe we can get it to grow and develop. So when these guys are maybe juniors, seniors, sophomores, maybe, that they can actually be someone say, you know what, I know that person X, Y, Z, whatever it may be, can be leaders and can be captains. Because to me, that was, when I heard that, I just kind of shook my head, like, I don't understand what you got going on here. And then for the younger levels, like you said, I think that's the best example. Like you said, I agree 100%. Pee-wees, you don't need a captain, but what you do need is, if you got 15 players on your team, you need 15 players to understand what leadership is, so that maybe when they get to that next level, now you do have some candidates. So I think it is a teaching process for sure, but overlooked too. Too easily overlooked, because to Wally's point, we're now so all consumed with wins and losses and how does my team look, and all the things that really at the end of the day don't matter for the kids as human beings in their development.
Right.
Peter, you had talked about, and it was a really great example. I think it was young players coming into a room and there being a cleaner on top of one of the desks and paper towels. Can you share that?
Yes, we were talking about, one of the things we used to do is community service. And again, I love details. I mean, to the point where I occasionally drive family members insane with it. But I really like details. I think they make the difference in everything we do. So we used to do some community service, and we would go to a school, and something as simple as cleaning desks. So paper towels and Windex, and you could see, and there was an individual that would say, hey, why don't you three guys grab the Windex and towels? You do that half of the room, we'll do this half of the room. Just observing a little detail like that, like naturally, that's someone that already understands the idea of what leadership is and organization. Like that's somebody you want to keep an eye on, if nothing else. And just little things like that, just keying into that, maybe it's something you're walking through the rooms at a younger level and a kid says, oh man, I forgot my clear tape. And the first kid that pops up and says, hey, I got some clear tape, here you go. Because for some reason, tape in a locker room to players can also be treated like gold, it seems. Like you have it, but you don't want to tell anybody that you have it, because that's your tape. You don't want to share it. But the individual that will toss you a roll and say, here you go. Little things like that, little keys like that, I think are interesting to me.
I think when you're in a team sport like we are, to ultimately to be successful, it takes everybody's got to have a part in it. And not everybody can score goals, and only a couple of them can play goalie. So you got a lot of guys in between there that need to be, and so what is leadership, especially with the younger players. You've got a lot of kids, for instance, who don't want to block shots, but you'll get some that will. And so I talked to him and said, so let's say you're a defenseman and you're a second-year defenseman and you're playing with a first-year defenseman. You can help your partner become better at the things you guys need to do, like block shots and like, whatever. And so you can lead, you can have an army of one next to you. You can be a leader of one, or you can be a leader of 20. And the other thing we did when I was coaching high school was, and we had 9, 10, 11, and 12-year-old, 12th grade kids in the locker room. And, the older boys, when I first started at that school, we had a couple seniors, and I said, well, I had lunch with them. I said, how are we going to get connected to the younger boys? And they go, well, it's not a problem. We already know them, and we're friends with all of them, because it was a pretty small school. And then I think I've told the story before. We got to an away game, and our senior captain, one of them, I went in the locker room, and he had broken something in his hand. So he had a cast on it, but he was playing with a cast. One of the other kids forgot his shin pads back at school. And this kid just, I'm just standing there, and I look over, and David's taking his shin pads off. He'd already gotten dressed, and he was taking them off, and he walked down and handed them to the kid that had less injuries than him and said, you play. Team needs you more than they need me. And so I was like, wow. At the end of the year, I had a conversation with everybody except the seniors. And I said, let's talk about captains for next year. Let's just talk about it. And who would be your ideal leader? And all of it. Well, David, because was just a great leader. So, players instinctively know who are good leaders. And I think we need to ask them who your leaders are. Who do you respect as a human being and as a team guy that cares about everybody else in the program? And that's so. This is what coaches don't get paid to do.
Right.
I think
And where's the education maybe on that piece for the coach as well, right? Like it's an easy thing to me. Maybe it's not easy, but to me it's an easy thing. So you have the individual there, right? My partner won't block shots, right? My partner won't block shots. Coach, what do I do? What do I do? You know what? You just walk up to your partner and you say, hey, you got to block some shots. And the kid's like, I don't want to do that. All you have to do is look him in the eye and say, I'd block a shot for you or anybody else on the team. And if that kid is a human being, that will resonate in some fashion. And I guarantee you at some point that kid is going to try to block a shot. But those are the kinds of things, maybe it comes from just, and I'm proud of this, but maybe it comes from being old, right? And just learning life's experiences. But again, like teaching coaches to understand what leadership is, like it's a great point. How do we teach the young kids to become leaders? But especially through the youth level, how do we teach adults to become leaders who potentially are not really receptive because they feel perhaps because they become an adult already that they get a pass on that. You're not going to teach me how to be a leader. I'm an adult. I'm married. I got kids, whatever. I'm all set. Like, how do we get the adults to buy in to what leadership actually is and how they could teach it? And maybe it's because I'm working with a local youth organization. This conversation is great. So maybe that's something that I introduce to them before the season starts when we have our meeting in late summer is, what do you think a leader is? And how can you teach leadership to your team? Give me examples. I'm pretty sure in the beginning, at least, that room's going to be pretty quiet.
I agree. Imagine if this expands and by the time they get to you, Peter, you've got a whole room full of leaders. Wouldn't that be awesome?
Yeah, how much fun with that? Because that just take the hockey out of it. You've created and helped create individuals that are going to be successful. I mean, the hockey is going to be good. You're going to take care of itself because it's hard for people that have that mindset to not become good at what they're doing.
Yeah.
Well,
there's that old theory of, forming, storming, norming, and performing, the cycles that teams go through. And it's actually an old business concept from the 50s. But we're in the forming stage, of course, it's the coach. has to select the players. If there's more players available than you can handle. And then you go into the storming phase where players are now on the team, but oh gosh, I don't want to play wing. I want to play center. I don't want to do this. I want my locker over here. I want to be on the power play. I want to be the penalty kill. And the coach kind of has to step in and kind of continue to drive the team through that process. And it's a communication process. Could take a week. It could take all. I've seen it take all season because the coach likes the team storming all the time. But then at some point they settle in and you go into a norming way where the coaches can step back a little bit and let some of the minor disputes within the team get sorted out within the team by the leaders on the team. But performing teams, the players just kind of take over. And as you achieve milestone goals that the team has, and they'd be performance goals, they set new ones for themselves. So you win, you win your district, you win your region, you go to the state tournament and you win the state tournament, for instance, in Minnesota. Most teams end up in the performing, in the norming stage, where not everybody's fully engaged, but there's no real issues. But and that's where probably 95% of the teams end up. But when you get a team that's in a performing stage where the players, as coaches, you just step back and tweak here and there. That's an amazing experience as a coach. I've only had in 50 years, I've only had a handful of teams like that. And it's a very rewarding experience for all the players too. So you coach hard, you practice hard, you coach hard. At some point, where do you allow now the leaders on your team to actually lead? And it's coach ego that decides some of that, right?
100%. Wally and I were talking about that, right? We were talking about it, I think, before you came on, that the best, if you will, bosses I've ever had didn't have big egos. And I think that's a killer, be you in the corporate world, be you in the business world. I mean, you may be great in the boardroom, you may be great with the other egotists, but the people that actually have to work for you don't want to work for you, and generally will do the minimum because they just don't think that you would throw them the life preserver if they were going overboard. It's the same thing for players too. It's the same thing for players. If they feel the coach is making it about him and always about his decisions and everything about what he says goes without any kind of input, you're not going to have a very good team. So it's exactly what you're saying. I mean, because it's not this. The world has evolved in a good way, where everyone wants to be included. But when you begin having inclusion, that also means you have to be willing to listen to dissenting opinions as well. Otherwise, you're actually not inclusive. So
I agree 100%. And the last, 4 years, I guess, every team I've coached, it's been the first year I've coached those kids. And my experience tells me that it's the second year you coach players, you have the greatest, you are a far better relationship with those players the second year. And of course, you're coaching them for 4 years, maybe. Yeah. So I always thought, second year is good, third year pretty good. That senior year, you don't have to talk to them too much. You got to pay attention to the other players on the team. Because we only have so many stories, and we only have so many ways to coach. And after 3 or 4 years, they've kind of seen all the tools in our toolkit. But I was asked a few years ago, and I say this with humility, that the majority of the teams I've ever coached have had great, have outperformed expectations. And I never knew why. I couldn't figure it out. And I said, there has to be a reason. I mean, there's only so many power plays. There's only so many D zone things. There's only so many things, and everybody, so I'm not like a hockey genius. I'm not an X and O's genius that can out coach that part of the game. But I guess it's because I out coach them in how I build relationships with all the players on the team and with the team as a whole. And it's just the way I do it. It's not like I have a master plan for it. But I just, I love the game, and I love the kids that play the game. I tell them that. I said, I love you guys. I mean, you're like my family. You're like my own kids. And sometimes I'm going to say no. I'm going to celebrate every success, and I'm going to be there crying with you when we fail together.
Yeah, that's a great philosophy. I mean, the idea that I'll always listen to you. It doesn't mean I always do what you say. We can agree to disagree, but understand I will always hear what you have to say. And that in and of itself, I think, is an issue with young people today. I don't know that they necessarily get that consistently. So that if you can consistently bring that to them into their lives, I think they'll love it. And I think, yes, in athletics, you will be successful when you can bring that concept in. Because because you genuinely care, it really matters, right? That saying about Maya Angelou, and I don't think I'll have it 100% correct, but I'll paraphrase it, that people will sometimes remember what you did, but they will always remember how you made them feel. And that's what you're talking about.
Yeah. And make everybody feel a part of the team. Go back to the blocking shots. When a kid blocks a shot, I mean, we recognize it from the bench while the game's going on. Hey guys, you see that block shot? That's awesome. Look at that. And I tell them every time 8 shots get blocked, we've saved a goal against. It takes 8 goals to score. 8 shots to score a goal is the average. It's the average in the National Hockey League. Is the average. Well, some teams in the National Hockey League need more than 8, but that's a pretty consistent stat through hockey. 8 shots, 1 goal. If you block 8 shots, you've saved a goal against. And it's not just up to the D; it's up to the forwards to block shots, especially with penalty killing. Those forwards on top have got to be able to get out and get in front of it, and get in front of that puck when that defenseman's trying to shoot. And that is so valuable. It counts so much in terms of team and team camaraderie, because the other players recognize it, and then they want to do it. If the coaches recognize it, then they want the coach to recognize them too, and they'll go out and do it. And then they start complimenting each other for doing it. It's like, it's so cool.
Yeah.
And then they just play better.
Yep. We had that too when I coached prep school. We had this group of 5 guys that were, let's say, scoring challenged, playmaking challenged. But you know what? They became the best penalty killers we had. When they came back to the bench after a shift on the PK, it was like they had just scored a goal. The boys were that excited about it because they were blocking shots, clearing pucks, again, doing whatever it took, and that was they found that, and it was just awesome. It was just so much fun to watch, and that was a really good team that year. We went pretty far.
Yeah. So it's the old thing: you start with a lump of clay, and you start to mold it through the season till you hopefully it now looks like a piece of art at the end.
Yeah, yes, yeah, and it's exactly what you're talking about, especially like how like it's 4-year process, right? It's like taking like this clump is a lump of clay, and you turn it into a cup, and finally by the time it gets to that 4th year, you're just constantly drinking out of it every day because you know it's reliable, you know it'll be there for you.
I think it's cool. It's great stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
What else is on your mind there, Wally? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, I think he's on the phone.
He's talking to somebody.
Probably
talking to somebody on the phone.
Talking to his broker.
No phones in the locker room, Wally.
Yeah, put the phone in the basket.
It's too funny.
Yeah, it is. You could tell him.
I gotta go off mute, Wally.
You're
muted.
Hal, you had mentioned, and I'm sure Peter, you the same thing. You've coached teams that have, in your mind, overachieved, and I think we've all had successes in terms of wins and losses. We've overachieved doing things the way we do. And I've got 2 words that probably mean more to leadership, being captains, being a coach, being a teammate. And the 2 words, and I'd like you to think about them, and over your years of coaching and leading, how they've helped you and how they worked into you being able to be the best you can be. The 2 words are trust and respect. So, how have you gained the trust and respect of your players, possibly of your parents, of the people who are in positions of authority to support you or let you go?
Well, those are interesting questions, or words. It's my observation, having coached a lot of teams over the years, that when you especially when you start with a new group, but also when you've got new players coming in, for some reason or another, they know pretty quickly if you have any idea what you're talking about and if you care about them. And then if you've been there for a while, the players in your program, as they come into it at the bottom, like in my case now, I'll have some players on my team this year that I coached last year, and I've already spent some time this spring with 2nd-year players that'll probably be on the team, and we've already got a conversation going on. They're getting to know me, and I'm getting to know them. So, but if the players come to conclusion the coach is not good, or is just another screamer and yeller, you're not going to get optimal performance out of that team. And so, our players down here, I hope it's the same in Canada. I mean, after every practice, they come over, they skate by and, give you a knuckle bump and say, thank you, great practice. Now, I don't know if they do that but I think that's pretty common. And when they leave the locker room, they do the same thing. They say, thanks, coach. Win or lose, they say, thanks, coach. Appreciate you. And so they've been schooled. Maybe they learned this in school too. I don't know. I like that way that they behave. And all my high school teams that I coached, when we would stop for meals, we'd get a lot of compliments from the restaurant we were at on how well behaved everybody was and how polite they were. Maybe that's why we didn't win as many games. I don't know. but we had a great reputation for being, civilized human beings, and people were always happy to welcome us back, which to me again those are life lessons that the kids need to make. What was it? Was respect, and what was the other one, Wally?
Trust.
Trust. Well, I told the story, maybe not to you guys, of last year, and my captain came to me in the playoff game and said we had a female goalie and we had a male goalie, and the female goalie was a first year and the male goalie was the second year, and they played every other game. It was her game. And he came to me and he said, "Coach, the boys want the male goalie. I don't want to use their names. Wants him to play." And I said, "Well, it's not his turn." And I told those goalies that they're going to play every other game unless they were sick or whatever. And he goes, "But coach, we always start slow. We need the second year guy. We need him in there to hold us into the game until we get going. And besides that, if we lose, this might be the last time he plays at this level because he's moving up." And I go, "Well," I said, "do you trust me?" And he goes, "Well, yeah, but the guy," I go, "No, wait a minute. I gave my word to the goalies at the beginning of the season. I told you guys this is what we're going to do." And I said, "So why don't you go back in the locker room and fix this slow start thing?" And that's on you guys. That's not, you don't need a goalie to get you so you can warm up in the game. Get out there and get after it. And we had an ice cut between the second and third period, which we didn't normally have. And he came out and said to me, and we were winning the game at the time. And he said, "Good call, coach. Thank you." And so that young lady did an awesome job. And the other female on the team, a forward, this was Bantams, she scored the winning goal in overtime. And so, those kids all saw something that they hadn't seen before in terms of from a coach. And I think also from understanding, again, they're Bantams, so they're 14 and 15. They're not, they have their life experiences are not all that great. I mean, in terms of quantity. And so I just think it's how you step on the ice and how you treat the players. And they're smart. Kids are smart. By the time they're in high school, they've had 60 or 70, maybe 80 different hockey coaches impact their life. How are you gonna stand out? Same with you, Peter, at college. Oh my God, those kids have probably had 100 coaches before you get a hold of them.
Yeah, no, for sure. And for me, I mean, I think you create one of the most important aspects of trust. Creating trust is consistency. Rules have applied to everyone. We had a boy on my team who, until 2 years ago, he was the leading scorer in the team. So he held that for, I think, about 6-7 years, which is pretty good. He was a all-time leading scorer on the team, but he had a temper. And my rule was that if you get misconduct for mouthing off to the official, you're done for the rest of the game. I'm not gonna tolerate that. And what really, I think, helped us grow culturally with our team was that consistency, because every so often he would do that, and it might be a close game, but he would do that after going into the box, and I'd sit him the rest of the game. And the team would look at me and be with sort of an expression, what are you doing? And I would just tell them that the rules are the same for everyone.
Uh,
And if you can become consistent with what you're doing, trust will come from that, because they know that what you said goes, and that you explain it from the standpoint of, I'm trying to make everyone here better, right? And there's ways I can maybe make you better by teaching you, hey, you know what, your feet should be like this when you're making a move, or you're approaching a pass, or I can make you better by teaching you the importance of keeping a cool head and being accountable. And I think once you teach that lesson and you gain that trust, I think respect naturally comes from that, because they know that this individual will do what they say, and they will treat us all the same in terms of the accountability piece on the ice. So I think they go hand in hand in that way.
I just want to mention on the male side, I've witnessed exactly what you've said, Peter. Midget AAA hockey in a quadrant of our city here, watching the team play, sitting with one of the dads who I coached the right way, like consistently, behaviorally, growing up. And shift lengths weren't an issue for us, because we learned to respect that. And behavior, disrespect on the ice towards an official, in other disrespectful things, a reaction penalty, trying to get even, they need to learn discipline. And I watched this team, which was very talented, and the top line would stay out too long, take bad penalties, and they would not be addressed. And they didn't succeed. So sitting with a parent who I had coached in the stands, who was astounded by observing this, you couldn't do anything about it. It's the way it is in some places on the male side. And I think what we're talking about here is, you don't let the inmates run the asylum. The sport teaches you the values and the right way to do things. Put in the effort, trust one another to do the effort. And as a coach, the players trust you because you're consistent and you're dealing with the same issue. It doesn't matter who the player is. And I think, I don't know on the female side whether it's as big an issue, but I still think at some very high competitive female levels, there's entitlement. There's not consistency of dealing with proper behaviors and discipline, length, and the more talented players might be getting double shifted and be exhausted and not perform. How does that affect the energy of your team?
Sure. And the other thing you're talking about there too, Wally, is that relates 100% to your team's culture, right? I mean, to me, culture is the lowest level of behavior that you find acceptable to the group, that the group finds acceptable. That's where your culture is. And when you have those kinds of things going on, you're going to have very poor culture in your team, because you're just going to create confusion in a player's head of why this is happening. You're going to create resentment that they're getting ice time, they can do X, Y, Z, and it's okay because they score goals. So I think all of that affects the culture of the team, which, as we've always talked about, is such a difference maker for your success and your wins and losses.
I even extrapolate that to the NHL level, and the teams that have this vast gap of extreme stars and foot soldiers on their teams. And I think Toronto and Edmonton would be the best two examples. And having the culture, being able to create a culture, a team culture with trust and respect, looking at effort and the ability of the coach to reward or deal with issues. Reward what they're doing well by even pointing it out, and make sure you deal with things consistently that need to be dealt with. And I think that's where the wishy-washy nature of coaching and leadership is. If you don't walk the talk, don't expect performance results.
No, 100%, you know, and I think too, I think one of the things that my own little mantra is, there's no such thing in life as a problem, because a problem comes from a situation that you didn't deal with. And if there is a problem, it came from that situation that you either chose not to deal with, or whatever reason was not dealt with. That's where problems come from, because if you deal with situations, they rarely become an actual problem.
We had that last year with a couple of our boys. Apparently we're bullying some of the younger kids, and these boys are actually brothers. And when I heard about it, we dealt with it. Like in the past, 2 years ago, when I had a problem with a couple of kids, you know, the association wanted to deal with it, and they didn't. And it was 2 months of a problem until I finally dealt with it the last week with the problem kid, and it actually, I think, helped us be more successful in the playoffs. But these two kids, I got them with their dad and sat them down, and I said, this has to stop right now. He says, you're 13 years old. I mean, what gives you the right to bully kids on this team? None of you accomplished anything in your life yet of significance. And they looked at me, and I said, and I got a call from school today and telling me you were doing this at lunch. I said, that's unacceptable. You can't play on my team if you don't fix this right now.
I think it's great, Hal. I think it's great, and it really sounds like the 1970s in a good way. That school actually called you.
Yeah.
Because that there's so much of that going on that I see, high school educators that I know, that there's no way that would ever happen.
Oh, wow.
So I think that's great. I think that's great that you had that kind of relationship with the school, and they knew that that school knew that was something these kids were involved in, and that this is an individual I should let know about that. That's great.
So it's worked out great. Actually, they straightened right out, and they were, it's a complicated situation, but one of them was one of our better players, but again, this is a low-skilled group, and I've now convinced them. I've provided them with some opportunities in the off season to lean in and improve their skills, especially their skating skills. One's a little reluctant still, but the other one's all in, and they're twins, and so they're never both going to go the same direction.
Sure.
At the same time, right? But their parents are all in, which is really good. And they're not going to force them to do anything, but they'll certainly support them, and they'll support me in my working with these kids. In theory, I might only have one of them on my team this next year, and the other one will be on the lower team. I don't think that'll happen, but who knows? Who knows what happens in September? when we start, picking teams, and they're prepared for, the parents are prepared for that. So, which is nice. So, so Wally, when you were on your phone, we were remarking that you shouldn't be talking on your phone. Your phone should go in the basket when we're here in the locker room.
Well, I have to tell you, it's a personal story. I'm going to a celebration of life in my hometown tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's a 7-hour drive.
Oh, geez.
I didn't want to inconvenience people about where I was staying because, and the gentleman that phoned was going to have me stay at his daughter's. And I said, I've already got a place arranged with my brother who's meeting me coming from Winnipeg.
Okay.
So I really had to attend to the call.
No, that's okay. We're
And
just teasing you. So, I got to run, guys. This was
Okay.
fun. I always
so
super.
listen, before you run,
Yeah.
I've got 2 people that are going to come on and we're going to continue the leadership
Okay.
discussion. One of them is a female hockey coach, an experienced coach that coached in the 2006 Olympics with Tim Bothwell.
Okay.
And at that time, she was doing leadership work and talked about it with the national team.
Yep.
And she's also doing it now with the Brock University team.
Cool.
And I wanted to get her in. And Craig Parrott, who is younger than us, but experienced, is now coming into Girls Hockey Calgary.
Okay.
And the book that you've shared, he's used,
Yeah.
but literally given it to the leaders to use as they see fit.
Yeah.
And some of the leaders that have bought the book for themselves, they're taking it into their lives,
Yeah. That's great.
using it. So that'll be set up down the road. Craig,
Good.
it's I gotta run too.
Okay. See you later.
Okay.
Have a great weekend.
Talk to you later. Bye bye.
See you, boys.
Hi, John.